This week's episode is sponsored by the Grim Hollow Campaign Guide, brought to you by our amazing friends at Ghostfire Games.
The Grim Hollow Campaign Guide is a perfect introduction to running dark fantasy in your games of 5th edition. For all of you fans of macabre horror and stories against dark creatures of the night such as vampires, demons, liches, and undead, and werewolves, this book has got you covered for how to run amazing adventures in worlds haunted by terrible creatures.
This book includes all sorts of rules for how to hunt these monsters or how to become them. So there's a lot packed in this book to expand your game worlds. The book is available now on the Ghostfire Games website through their store. You can follow the links below to grab your copy today.
And now, on to this week's episode. Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
This video is part 1 of our tier rankings for the subclasses available to Warlocks in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We are going to be looking at the various Eldritch patrons that your Warlock can make a pact with, and this week we will be looking at the 3 found in the player's handbook, the Archfey, the Fiend, and the Great Old One. In a future episode, we'll be looking at the new patrons that have been introduced in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, as well as Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and other publications as well, because there's quite a handful out there now.
If you look on the screen right now, you're going to see the criteria we use to rank the subclasses. We have pitted the subclasses against each other and not those of other classes. Also, keep in mind that the flavor roleplay is not going to be a main component of our ranking. We might take into account multi-classing, but it is also not a core piece that we're looking at.
Yeah, we can't actually figure out how your Dungeon Master is going to run your relationship with your Eldritch patron, and some Dungeon Masters are going to be super tricky and specific about this, and some Dungeon Masters are probably going to ignore it. All the Eldritch patrons can be tricky characters, though. They're all kind of made that way by design, so we're not going to rank them any differently based on that sort of criteria. Of course, we do rank all the subclasses based on looking at how they augment the base class in all areas of D&D 5e play. That includes combat, but also exploration and social interactions and encounters. This is always just our opinion based on our experience, so take it for what it's worth.
There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling. No matter what Warlock patron you pick, you are going to gain features at 1st, 6th, 10th, and 14th level, as well as an expanded spell list. All of these expanded spell lists add a group of spells that you can choose as you level up, but they are not immediately added to your spells known. They just become options for you as you pick and choose your Warlock spells.
This is a very important distinction because it means that technically speaking, you could completely ignore the expanded spell list with your Warlock and just pick spells from the baseline Warlock spell list. And in fact, you can build a pretty strong Warlock just doing that. So when we look at the expanded spell lists, we're kind of going to choose how many out of the extra 10 would we actually choose over the regular Warlock spells. It's actually not an easy decision and can say a lot about how much these subclasses offer the Warlock. If you've happened to wander into the forests of Arden or the deep depths of the Feywild, you might have found yourself having to make a deal with the fairy lords of that strange otherworld. One of the Archfey, Titania, Oberon, or any of the other strange entities that inhabit that magical realm of trickery and magic.
So up on screen right now, you are going to see the expanded spell list for the Archfey Warlock. Out of these options, I'm kind of drawn to picking maybe Fairy Fire, Blink, Greater Invisibility, and Dominate Person. Something like Phantasmal Force might also be interesting, but there's a lot of competition here on whether I'm going to pick some of these options over what's already presented to the Warlock.
I'm a pretty big fan of spells like Sleep at low levels of play. I think it's a great pick for the early levels of your Warlock. And I also do quite like Seeming. Plant Growth is a really cool spell as well. The other ones on this list, maybe not so much. So I think overall, 7 out of 10,
7 out of 10 is a great score, and I actually think that that makes it a decent spell list to present to a Warlock.
Yeah, I think there's some really compelling options here, and you can either take ones that are strictly useful in combat or exploration, but there's a few as well that'll help you in role-playing, social interaction, and especially trickery and illusions.
Also, at first level, you're going to gain the Fey Presence ability, which allows you to, once per rest, charm or frighten a group of enemies within 10 feet of you. This charm or frightening effect lasts until the end of your next turn.
This is kind of useful as a low-level control ability because charmed enemies can't attack you, and frightened enemies have disadvantage on their attack rolls and can't move closer to you while they can see you. So this is actually a pretty useful little debuff power that you can throw on some enemies and reposition yourself and actually use it as some battlefield control and a debuff. Not bad, actually.
At 6th level, you gain Misty Escape. This ability means that when you receive damage, you can become invisible and teleport 60 feet away. You can use this once as a reaction, and then you have to take a short or long rest to regain the ability.
This is an excellent way to save your bacon when you're getting beaten up. At level 10, you gain Beguiling Defenses. You become immune to becoming charmed, and when other creatures try to charm you, they have to make a saving throw, or they get charmed by you instead. So this is kind of like playing the Uno reversal card on people trying to mind control you.
At 14th level, you gain Dark Delirium. You can choose an opponent within 60 feet of you, and they have to make a Wisdom saving throw against your Warlock spell save DC. If they fail, you bring them into a shadowy, illusory realm where you and them are the only people that exist, and you can talk to them as they are charmed by you. This effect lasts for 1 minute, but you do need to concentrate on it.
You have to concentrate on the ability, but ultimately, this ability is like a prototype version of the spell Mental Prison, which is a 6th level spell from Xanathar's Guide to Everything.
So the Archfey is a really interesting Warlock option. There are a lot of options presented here that go beyond just combat, but are also useful in combat. I really like their spell list. I think if we're talking about the 7 out of 10, a lot of expanded spell lists don't actually ever get that good. So this is a pretty decent expanded spell list with spells that, again, can augment your abilities in combat. They can augment social interactions or various other aspects of the game. I also think that a lot of these abilities, these charm effects and frightening effects, can actually be really useful if in the hands of a creative player who knows how to use these to their benefit. I think that charm can be something that not a lot of people dig into, but when used properly, can devastate combat encounters, or if you're running a social intrigue campaign, this might be the best option. There's a lot of ways to influence people and change scenarios, whether you're in social exploration or combat. I even think with that Dark Delirium option at top level, yeah, you can pick out a target during a combat to drive them into this illusory realm. But also, if you need to interrogate a villain in a safe space, using this ability to kind of pull them into an illusory realm where now they are charmed and you get to talk to them one-on-one in a world of your own making, that is a really compelling option for a scary warlock who can confront the villains in a really interesting way. So I think that the Archfey opens up a really awesome play style that is both sort of infiltration, interrogation, but also combat and battlefield control. I want to give this an A. I think that it's actually a really strong choice, and there's a lot of options presented here that can work in various ways.
I agree. I think this is an excellent subclass, and I give it an A as well. I think that it does require a really good understanding of how charm and fear effects work specifically, and it does lose a lot of gas if you end up fighting enemies that are immune to charm and fear, but you still have your regular warlock abilities to fall back on. In that case, you're not dependent on them. The thing to know about charmed is that it isn't mind control. A creature that is charmed by you cannot attack or otherwise harm you, and you have advantage on all your charisma checks to interact with them, but they don't obey your commands. So these lower level abilities that charm groups of creatures don't force them to obey you. They just perceive you in the most favorable possible way when you're interacting with them. That said, I echo, Dark Delirium is amazing. It should be clarified that Dark Delirium isn't actually transporting you or the target to another realm. It's entirely illusory and exists within your mind, basically. But that alone is amazing. And as I said, it's equivalent to about a 6th level spell that you now get back on a short rest. That makes it really good for a 14th level ability because it's coming online just shortly after you get your 6th and 7th level spell slots, and kind of eases the pressure on what you need to select for your higher level spell slots as well. So I really quite like that. I think the only ability that is kind of niche is the immunity to charm yourself and the kind of the reversal effect of it. But of course, it will save you when it matters. Your charisma saving throws are going to be pretty good, though, to resist charm effects.
But that is one thing, is that is, in my opinion, the most niche ability that this option gets. But even then, when you do use it and you get to swing that charm around to your enemy, that makes you feel like a cool spellcaster.
Misty Escape is also one of the best save your life abilities in that it teleports you out of there and turns you invisibly. Yes, you still have to take the initial damage, but it triggers on damage. So it's not an attack. You can get out of the dragon's breath. You can get out of a damaging aura. You can get out of the area of a wall of fire. So that makes it really adaptable in how it can be used. And as we said earlier, even the first level ability has some very interesting battlefield control powers. And all of these together, these are all abilities that I would regularly use in combat, in addition to my Warlock spells. And they all come back on a short rest as well. So you have this entire suite of abilities that, like, even if you're playing at 15th level, the first level power is good. The 14th level power is good. So you can use these to make your normally very limited Warlock spell slots stretch even further. And for a Warlock subclass, that is really good.
Yeah, I think we're coming out with a bang here with the Archfey. I think that they present a really awesome option for Warlocks out there. So definitely an A-tier subclass. The intensity doesn't stop there. Let's add some more gas to this fire and jump into the Fiend patron for the Warlock.
So if you want to sell your soul Faustian style, or you just want to make a deal with Orcus that is very, very, very misguided, this is your Warlock patron.
So first of all, let's look at the expanded spell list. We'll put that up on screen right now. Most of these spells, I would argue, are worth taking.
My fiendish patron is telling me to burn things.
And burn things you can. What a great spell list. Obviously, Monty and I both like to blow things up in Dungeons & Dragons, and this spell list has all the fire you need to fuel all the explosive, blasty encounters that you get yourself caught up in as a Fiend patron Warlock.
We got Burning Hands, we got Command, we got Scorching Ray, we got Stinking Cloud, we got Fireball, we got Wall of Fire, we got Fire Shield, we got Flame Strike. Burn, baby, burn. The only spell on this list that I probably wouldn't take in most campaigns is Hallow.
That being said, I had a player take Hallow and use it really, really well in the campaign I was running, so it does have a place. So yes, the Fiend is going to be much more fiery and blasty, and not only does your patron want you to burn things, but they want you to kill people as well. And kill people you will. And when you do, you get to absorb their life force with Dark One's Blessing, allowing you to take temporary HP equal to your Charisma modifier plus your Warlock level. So as you level up, this ability remains useful, always adding a bunch of temporary HP with every kill that you get.
Remember, temporary hit points do not stack.
But as a final point on that, the great way to look at this is if you do blast somebody and you lose part of those temp HP and then you kill somebody on your next turn, you can just replenish them back up to the total amount that you're able to gain.
Though selling your soul is a pretty unfortunate decision, in the meantime you can enjoy the Dark One's own luck. This is a very simple ability that allows you to add a D10 to an ability check or a saving throw before the final result is determined. So if you roll badly on that saving throw against getting mind controlled, or if you messed up a skill check to lie to somebody that you didn't in fact sell your soul, you can just roll that D10 and add that to the total.
At 10th level, you gain Fiendish Resilience. Every time you finish a short or long rest, you get to choose a damage type and gain resistance to that damage type. This resistance lasts until your next short or long rest, where you can change it up as you see fit. If you have a little bit of foresight and are able to assume the type of encounters and dangers that are coming up in the campaign, this is incredibly valuable.
Interestingly enough, you could actually choose bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage for the purposes of this ability. However, damage that comes from magical weapons or silvered weapons will ignore this. So for example, if you choose fire and a wizard fireballs you, you'll still have resistance to that fire damage. But if you choose slashing damage and a paladin tries to cut your head off with a Holy Avenger, you're going to take all that damage.
At 14th level, you gain the ability Hurl Through Hell. When you hit a target with an attack, you can immediately decide to throw them through the lower planes of the 9 hells. They take 10d10 psychic damage and reappear at the end of your next turn. If they are Fiend, they get to ignore this damage, but everybody else is going for a ride through hell.
There is no saving throw against this ability. You hit them with an attack, and boom, they're on a roller coaster ride straight through hell.
The Fiend is insane in combat. Now, what's great about the Fiend is if you look at the spell list, if you look at a lot of these abilities, yes, it's driving you to murder, death, kill everything around you. But in the game of Dungeons and Dragons, there are a lot of situations where that's going to be happening anyway. And yeah, this is probably the most combat-focused build for a Warlock. But if you're going out the gate being like, I'm going to take Eldritch Blast and Hex and do my damage and be that blaster spellcaster, the Fiend doubles down on that by adding a ton of fiery spells. Not to mention the really key abilities like being able to gain temporary HP, which yes, you have to kill to do that, but temporary HP is useful in every aspect of the game. There's never a time that you don't want more HP. Also, the ability to add 1d10 to any ability check or saving throw has implications far beyond combat encounters. And I actually think that if you look at the entire package here, this offers not only a double down on what you can perform in combat, but also a nice little spattering of options for outside of combat as well. When you get to the 14th level ability for Hurl Through Hell, that is just one of the most fun things that I've read for a Warlock to be able to do, and it's really, really satisfying to just hit somebody with an Eldritch Blast in late game combat. Maybe it's like a mini boss or one of the final NPCs that you've been hunting down for a long time, and bam, you just get to hurl them right through hell and deliver 10d10 psychic damage to them. It's really satisfying. I think that this is one of the S-tier Warlock subclasses. I think that it's great and it offers a lot. I might be biased because I love fire and fire magic, but I just think that this is phenomenal.
I really do think that the Fiend offers an excellent option for a fantastic blaster caster. And with all the augmentations that Warlocks have now seen, with the various new invocations that have been added in other sources, it's really easy to look at the Fiend in comparison to, say, the Hexblade, and think that it doesn't offer as much. But it offers a lot. It really does. It's packed with features, and I would personally say that it is probably the best alternative. We're going to talk about the Hexblade more in the next episode, but if you aren't interested in the kind of sword and spell gishy side of playstyle, you just want to blast people, this is your ticket. And this is, in my opinion, I think it's one of the best blasters in the game. Just straight out of the box, no multi-classing, no fuss. You don't have to play around with a fancy build. You want one of the most effective blaster spellcasters in the game. It's a Fiend-packed Warlock for sure. For me, whenever I give out an S-tier ranking, I go, is this offering something that is one of the best in the game? And I think you find it here with this. It definitely has been elevated with some of the newer invocations and some of the expanded spell lists. And like all the Warlocks, you gotta build one carefully, but I have found a Fiend-packed Warlock monstrously satisfying to play. Yes, there's the limitations of the limited spell slots. That's something that all the Warlocks suffer from. But with the Fiend-packed Warlock, you have the most obvious, like, toss out Hex, toss out Fireball, throw some commands. Command, by the way, scales amazingly with the Warlock spell slots. It's because it targets additional people as a higher level spell. So you get the core gameplay here, and it really does sizzle in no other way.
Now, sometimes there's no point in selling your soul if existence is meaningless, and sometimes if you stare into the void stares back. And the void might be the great old one, Warlock Patron.
For fans of H.P. Lovecraft and the whole Call of Cthulhu mythos, this is your classic ticket, where you can have a crazy stargazing warlock that looks to the darkest places of the universe and the far realm for their eldritch patron.
So first and foremost, let's put the spell list up on the screen here, and let's talk about some of our favorites. I really like the addition of Dissonant Whispers, Phantasmal Force, and Ivard's Black Tentacles. I think these really suit the theme and are really useful spells.
I also like Tasha's Hideous Laughter. I think there's a case to be made for Detect Thoughts, as well as possibly Telekinesis and Dominate Person. Some of the other ones like Clairvoyance and Sending, your mileage may vary. I, as a world builder, love the Sending spell, but it's really hard to justify it taking it with a Warlock for your spell slots. So overall, I think that this one is like a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, which kind of makes it the weakest spell list that we've looked at so far, but that's not to say that it doesn't add some really meaningful options that really suit a great old one style.
Yeah, it really depends with the spell list whether you want the aggressive battlefield control spells that you get with things like Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Dissonant Whispers, and Ivard's Black Tentacles. Ivard's Black Tentacles is an awesome spell, but to me it really competes with Hunger of Hadar. And it's really hard to decide which of those two you would want. And like Hunger of Hadar, every Warlock gets it.
And it already feels really great old one-y to have Hunger of Hadar. I imagine that Hadar is a great old one.
Yeah, so it's kind of tricky where there's a lot of spells on this list that aren't necessarily stand out better than things that Warlocks already get.
Also at first level, you're going to gain Awakened Mind. This lets you telepathically communicate with any creature within 30 feet of you. This is a one-way communication, which is a mistake we made in our campaign.
Yeah, we've made this a few times.
So the Warlock can communicate with everybody within 30 feet, but they cannot telepathically communicate back. But it is a good one-way messaging system.
My basic rule of thumb is that this telepathy is still not the suggestion spell. So you still have to play by the rules of deception, intimidation, and other charisma checks. You can't use this in the same way that you would use suggestion.
And that seems fair, otherwise you're stepping on the toes of a great spell. At 6th level, you gain Entropic Ward. If a creature makes an attack roll against you, you can use a reaction to force disadvantage on the roll. If they miss, you now gain advantage on your next attack against them, as long as it happens before the end of your next turn.
At level 10, you gain Thought Shield. You are resistant to psychic damage, and your own thoughts cannot be read by other creatures. In addition, whenever a creature does deal damage to you, they take an amount of psychic damage equal to the psychic damage that you took. Take that, Mind Flayers.
At 14th level, you gain the Create Thrall ability. You can touch an incapacitated humanoid, and they are charmed by you until either the curse is removed or you choose another target. During this time, you can communicate telepathically with them as long as you are on the same plane of existence.
Remember, this ability says that you charm that creature basically indefinitely. This means that that creature cannot attack you or harm you, and you have advantage on all your charisma checks against them to influence them socially. But it is not mind control. So the name Create Thrall is a little bit misleading here because they're not dominated by you. Whether or not they're going to serve you in combat or whether or not they're going to do everything you say really depends on the circumstances. And they do have to be incapacitated before you can use this ability against them.
I think that they should rename this option Create Friend. When we look at the Great Old One Warlock, there are a lot of really unique and cool features here. The spell list is good, but not as good as some of the other options we've seen. The abilities seem a little bit more niche, but are still incredibly useful. I think that if you can find a way to use Create Friend, which I'm calling it now, then it can be really cool. There's a lot of telepathy and mind control and a lot of kind of mind-bending, altering sort of features here that have a place in the right campaign. And I think that I want to give the Great Old One Warlock a strong B. I don't think that this is a bad subclass by any means, and B is not bad. B means that in the right campaign setting with the right group, the right DM, all of that, that this could excel and be a really, really strong candidate for a great player character. And I think this offers that. I think that there's a lot of potential here if things go the right way and you're in a campaign where these abilities become extremely useful. But I also think that there is a case where this is one of the weaker options for Warlocks.
I have to come out and say that in my experience with players of this class, they almost always try to use the telepathy in creative ways. And as we alluded to earlier, most often they try to use it as if it was the ability to cast the suggestion spell at will. I have seen this in so many games, and I've had to sit players down and tell them, your expectations of what this ability can do are out of line. And so if you read this ability and think that it acts like casting the suggestion spell at will because the target doesn't know where the voices are coming from and this is going to freak them out and cause them to be mind controlled, I feel like you're probably misreading this ability and giving it more credit than it deserves. It's a useful communication tool between your party members. That's the thing that it definitely does. If your Dungeon Master allows this ability to operate as the suggestion spell at will, then yes, this is an S-tier subclass. I think a Dungeon Master that interprets this ability that way is making a very grave mistake. So in that respect, I agree with you completely, Kelly. It is a B-tier subclass. Having seen this in many games of Adventures League, having seen Dungeon Masters struggle with how to use this ability when players use it in creative ways, the line has to be drawn by saying it is not suggestion at will. It can freak people out. You have to make charisma checks. Otherwise, it is just a broken ability.
Entropic Ward and Thought Shield are pretty decent abilities. They have their uses, and there's some great options there. But then we come to the Create Thrall ability, which again messes around with this whole, is it mind control? The answer is no. So you're just charming a person indefinitely, which means that, yeah, they're your friend, and they're probably more likely to help you out. But if you're like, go into that scary dungeon and make sure it's safe, they might be like, I don't want to. And that's valid. They still have their own free will. They just see you as a friend.
Make no mistake, a more generous interpretation of Awakened Mind and Create Thrall propels this subclass to the S tier. For sure. But reading that on the page is not what these abilities do. So our B ranking is based on that measured reading of these abilities. And if you have a Dungeon Master that wants to go wild with these, well, they're digging their own grave as far as I'm concerned.
And I mean, again, B means that in the right campaign, it's going to be S tier, and this very much has that potential. So I think that it's safe to say that it's a B ranked subclass for us. So up on the screen right now, you're going to see our final rankings for the first 3 subclasses presented in the player's handbook. But let's see what our community gave these 3 subclasses.
Looking at the Archfey, only a small sliver of people gave it an S tier ranking. 24.5% of respondents gave it an A tier ranking, whereas 53.2% gave it the B tier ranking, and 15.8% gave it a C, with another sliver in the D tier ranking, but not too much. Overall, our community ranks the Archfey as a B tier subclass, which speaks to the satisfying experience that I think many people had playing one.
When we look at the Fiend, this one does have a 22.5% S tier, which is a good amount of S tier rankings. It has 53.4% A tier, 20.7% B tier, and just a very small amount of C and D tier. What I think is clear here is that this does land as an A tier from our community. We might have liked it a little bit stronger, but it is nice to see that there is a decent percentage who gave it the S tier as well.
For the Great Old One, only 6.5% of respondents gave it an S tier ranking, whereas 28.1% gave it an A tier ranking, and 42% gave it a B, 19.5% giving it a C tier ranking. I think the Warlock is a very conceptually heavy subclass. And so if we see the overall rankings across all of these ones, perhaps Kelly and I are overrating them. Maybe we like the Warlock a little bit more than the broader community. But the breakdown is pretty similar.
What's really interesting about the Warlock is that unlike other classes where your subclass is relatively defining, the Warlock is less defined by their subclass because you also need to take into account your pact choice, your spell choices, and your invocation choices, which make it a really sort of big variable on how your Warlock is going to turn out. A Great Old One Warlock with different invocation spells and pact might play extremely different from another Great Old One Warlock with different options chosen. So there's a lot of variables even within these subclasses. What I think, though, is that all of the subclasses present a really unique and interesting option. And of the ones in the player's handbook, all of these, I think, present excellent choices for a Warlock player. And I don't think any Warlock player is going to be unsatisfied by choosing whatever one speaks to them the most. Up on screen right now, you're going to see the final rankings we gave, and next to that, you will see the final rankings the community gave. All in all, Monty and I really like Warlocks.
Yeah, they're a great class, and I think they've really come into their own as they had more support, more invocations, more spells added. It's a really well-designed class.
So this has been a look at our tier rankings for the Warlock subclasses in the Player's Handbook in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us your thoughts on these subclasses in the comments below.
Kelly and I want to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters for making our work here on YouTube possible. If you enjoy the work that we create on YouTube and elsewhere and want to join our YouTube community, stop in on our private Discord server, chat with us, talk about our future episodes in our writers' rooms, please follow the links in the description below to check that out.
And don't forget to check out our live plays in the Worlds of DRAKKENHEIM, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes of that show right up over here.
And we are almost done ranking all the subclasses in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You can find the prior episodes for the other classes we've covered so far right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.